Before they were borders, before the word Nebraska was spoken aloud, the land woke slowly. Dawn came not as a sharp moment, but as a soft unfolding. Pale light crept across the Platte River Valley, touching the frost-laced grasses first, then the cottonwoods that lined the water's edge. The river lay wide and shallow, its surface smooth as glass, mirroring a sky brushed with pink and gold. The Platte did not rush. It spread itself thin and patient, as if it had learned long ago that endurance mattered more than speed. Mist rose from the water, drifting low and white, carrying the chill of night away. Birds stirred in the reeds. Somewhere, unseen, a meadowlark called, its song clear and hopeful, cutting through the quiet like a promise. This was a place of balance. Sky and earth met without resistance. Nothing blocked the horizon. The land did not rise to challenge the heavens. It opened itself instead, vast and honest. Here, time felt slower, shaped by the steady rhythm of seasons rather than minutes. The wind moved through the grass in gentle waves, bending each blade in turn, whispering stories no one had written down yet. The land remembered even when people did not. This was Nebraska before it had a name. By mid-morning, the sun climbed higher, and the Great Plains revealed themselves fully. Grasslands rolled outward in every direction, stretching so far that distance lost its meaning. There were no fences, no roads, only the soft undulation of prairie and the immense sky above it. Clouds gathered and drifted, tall and dramatic, casting slow-moving shadows that traveled miles before dissolving. The wind never truly stopped here. It brushed across the land like a living thing, carrying the scent of earth and grass, pressing against bodies, shaping thought itself. Silence existed, but it was never empty. It hummed with insects, distant bird calls, and the low sigh of grass bending in unison. To stand alone on the plains was to feel both insignificant and deeply connected. The sky made no effort to comfort. It simply existed, vast, impartial, endless. Those who lived here learned humility quickly. The land did not bend to desire. It asked for patience, awareness, and respect. Storm clouds sometimes formed without warning, rising like mountains in the distance. On other days, the sky stretched endlessly blue, broken only by thin white streaks of cirrus clouds that seemed painted on by a careful hand. This openness shaped everything that would come later. It shaped how people thought, how they endured, and how they learned to measure themselves, not by what they owned, but by how well they understood the land beneath their feet. Long before wagons scarred the soil, before iron rails cut lines across the plains, the Platte River belonged to the people who knew it best. The Pawnee villages rose near its bends, their earth lodges strong and round, built low against the wind. The Omaha and Ponca followed the river's guidance as well, understanding its moods and seasons. The Platte was not merely water. It was a path, a provider, a teacher. Children learned early how to read the land. They knew where the grasses grew tallest, where the animals crossed, where the river would swell in spring and retreat in summer. Elders spoke of the sky with reverence, of storms that carried power and lessons, of stars that marked time and direction. Clothing was made from what the land offered, soft hides, carefully worked, decorated with meaning rather than excess. Warm earth tones blended naturally into the prairie, a harmony rather than a contrast. The people moved with the seasons, not against them. When the bison traveled, they followed. When winter came, they prepared. Survival was not conquest, it was relationship. Ceremonies honored the balance between human life and the world that sustained it. Songs carried across the plains at night, rising into the sky like smoke from a sacred fire.
Hold steady!
The land listened.
Children are scared.
It always listened. Sometimes
Not yet. Stay
the
close.
ground itself seemed to breathe. The bison came in numbers so great they darkened the horizon. From a distance, they appeared as a moving shadow, rolling across the prairie like a storm made of muscle and fur. As they drew closer, the earth trembled beneath their weight. Thousands upon thousands moved together, massive bodies, curved horns, thick coats catching the golden light of afternoon. Dust rose in clouds around them, turning the air amber. The sound of their hooves was deep and steady, a rhythm older than memory. The bison were life on the plains. They fed the people, clothed them, shaped their tools and stories. Nothing was wasted. Every part had purpose. To hunt the bison required skill, patience, and respect. It was never done lightly. When the herds passed, the grass eventually rose again, richer for it. The land healed itself, as it always had. Balance was maintained, not through control, but through understanding. Standing at the edge of such a herd, a person felt the power of belonging to something vast. Individual lives mattered, but they were threads in a larger design. The prairie, the river, the bison, the people, they were one story. The land watched as centuries passed. It saw footsteps fade and return. It felt fires burn and grass grow back stronger. It heard laughter and mourning carried away by the wind. It learned every name given to it and every name forgotten. The Platte continued its slow journey eastward, reflecting sunrises and sunsets without judgment. The plains remained open, waiting, not passively, but patiently. Change would come. It always does. Wheels would carve deep lines. Smoke would rise. The sky would witness joy and suffering alike. But for now, in this moment before everything shifted, Nebraska existed as it had always existed, wide, resilient, and alive beneath an endless sky. And it remembered. The first wagons appeared like ghosts on the horizon. They came slowly, pale shapes against the immense blue, their wooden wheels creaking under the weight of everything a family thought it would need to begin again. Oxen pulled steadily, heads down, muscles rolling beneath dusty hides. Men walked beside the teams, reins in hand. Women rode when they could, walked when they had to. Children learned early how to keep pace with hope. The Platte River guided them, just as it had guided countless travelers before. Its wide, shallow course offered reassurance, water nearby, grass for animals, a path through uncertainty. The trail followed its bends, worn deeper each season by the passing of feet, hooves, and wheels. Dust rose with every step, settling into clothes and hair, into the corners of eyes and memories. At night, wagons formed rough circles, fires flickered, and the prairie darkness pressed close, vast and watchful. Stories were told in low voices, of farms left behind, of land promised ahead, of relatives who would never see this place. The sky above them felt impossibly large, its stars sharp and cold. Some travelers found comfort in that immensity. Others felt small beneath it. The land did not greet them. It did not resist them either. It simply waited. Wheels broke. Animals fell ill. Storms swept in without warning, flattening grass and soaking supplies. When thunder rolled across the plains, it felt as though the sky itself were splitting open. Lightning carved bright lines through darkness, and rain turned dust to thick, clinging mud. Illness traveled faster than wagons. Graves appeared along the trail, simple markers, sometimes nothing more than a pile of stones or a carved name. Families moved on because they had to. Stopping meant falling behind, and falling behind meant being alone. Encounters with Native people were moments of tension and uncertainty, shaped by fear and misunderstanding. Some meetings passed quietly, marked by cautious glances and shared space. Others carried sharper edges. The land that had sustained many now held competing claims, and the ground absorbed the weight of those unspoken conflicts. Yet still they moved west, driven by the belief that endurance would be rewarded. The Platte flowed on, indifferent to their struggles, reflecting the same sky it always had. Not all who followed the trail continued onward. Some stopped. They looked out over the grasslands and saw possibility where others saw emptiness. Under laws that promised land to those willing to work it, families staked claims with measured steps and hopeful hearts. Wooden posts marked boundaries that had never existed before. Building a home was an act of defiance against the elements. Trees were scarce, so settlers cut the earth itself, stacking thick slabs of sod into walls that smelled of soil and grass. Roofs were heavy, doors low. These homes were dark and cool in summer, bitterly cold in winter, but they stood. A lone farmer might pause at the door of such a house at sunset, surveying land that was now, on paper, his. Tall grass rippled in the wind. The sky burned orange and red. Hope felt real then, even as exhaustion pressed deep into bones. The prairie did not give easily. Breaking the soil required strength and patience. Blisters formed, tools broke. Rain came too late or too much. But seeds were planted, and sometimes green shoots rose in defiance of doubt. Life settled into patterns shaped by necessity. Days began early, work ended late. Every task mattered: hauling water, mending fences, watching the sky for signs of weather. Neighbors might live miles apart, but they relied on one another. When barns went up, hands appeared. When sickness came, help followed. Children learned responsibility young. They carried water, gathered eggs, watched younger siblings. Education came when it could, sometimes in small schoolhouses, sometimes around kitchen tables. The land taught patience. Crops failed, then succeeded. Winters tested resolve. Summers burned hot and dry. Through it all, the prairie remained open, refusing to be tamed fully, insisting on respect. Some nights after the work was done, settlers stood outside their sod houses and listened. Wind moved through grass just as it always had. Stars spread across the sky in silent abundance. In those moments, the land felt ancient, larger than ambition. Yet, roots were growing. The trails never truly disappeared. Even after wagons moved on or settled, the lines remained, pressed into the earth, faint but persistent. The land remembered every passing, every pause, every claim made upon it. Homesteads dotted the plains now, small and fragile against the scale of the sky. Smoke rose from chimneys. Fields broke the sea of grass into rough squares. Change had arrived, slowly but surely. Still, the Platte flowed as it always had. The wind asked the same questions. The horizon stayed wide. Nebraska was becoming something new, shaped by effort and belief. But beneath it all, the land held steady, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The sound reached the prairie before the sight. A low, distant rumble rolled across the grasslands, unfamiliar and unsettling. Birds lifted from the fields in startled waves. Livestock shifted nervously. Then, over the rise of land, it appeared, black smoke rising into the sky, steel wheels flashing in the sun. The railroad came, like a promise forged from iron. Tracks cut long, straight lines through the land, ignoring rivers and hills alike. Where the prairie once bent gently with the wind, it now bore the weight of progress. Men labored with hammers and spikes, their movements rhythmic, relentless. Each strike echoed forward into a future few fully understood. Steam engines arrived in clouds of smoke and sound, hauling lumber, tools, and people who carried ambition in their pockets. Towns sprang up almost overnight along the rails, staked out where trains stopped to take on water and coal. A platform, a depot, a cluster of buildings, and suddenly a name appeared on maps. The land did not resist. It absorbed the change, as it always had. If the railroad was the spine, grain was the lifeblood. Elevators rose beside the tracks, tall wooden structures that dwarfed the low buildings around them. They stood like sentinels, visible for miles across flat land. Farmers hauled wagons heavy with wheat and corn, their wheels creaking under the weight of harvest. Inside the elevators, grain poured and rattled, a sound that came to define the region. It was the sound of survival, of success measured not in gold, but in bushels. Harvest season transformed the prairie. Fields turned from green to gold, shimmering under late summer sun. Dust hung in the air as threshing machines roared to life. Long days ended with aching muscles and quiet satisfaction. This was not an easy prosperity. It demanded everything, but it offered stability in return. With harvest came permanence. Main streets formed, lined with brick buildings and wide sidewalks. General stores sold everything from nails to sugar. Banks rose, their facades solid and reassuring. Churches anchored communities with steeples that reached upward, modest attempts to meet the sky. Water towers became symbols of survival, towering above towns like guardians. Painted names curved across their sides, declaring presence to travelers passing through. Each tower promised water in dry times, reassurance against fire and drought. Life unfolded at a measured pace. Trains arrived and departed. News traveled by word of mouth and weekly papers. Saturday nights brought gatherings, music, conversation, shared laughter that eased the weight of labor. These towns were not grand, but they were real. They belonged to those who built them. By late afternoon, sunlight softened, turning the land warm and amber. Combines moved steadily through endless rows of corn, their engines humming with purpose. Stalks fell, grain poured, dust rose. The air smelled of earth and ripeness, of work nearly complete. Farmers paused sometimes, leaning against machinery, wiping sweat from brows, surveying fields that represented months of effort. Success was never guaranteed. Weather could still turn cruel. Prices could fall. But in moments like these, pride took root. Children played at the edges of fields, learning the shape of their future. The land was no longer just possibility, it was livelihood. The prairie had changed, but it still demanded attention, humility, and respect. By the early years of the new century, Nebraska was no longer a frontier. It was a place of farms and towns, of schedules and routines. Rail lines stitched communities together. Grain moved east and west, feeding cities far beyond the horizon. Yet even as progress accelerated, the sky remained vast. Storms still gathered without warning. Winters still tested resolve. The land had accepted iron and grain, but it had not surrendered its authority. Nebraska stood balanced between past and future, rooted in soil, propelled by motion. The next changes would come not from fields, but from cities. Lincoln grew from intention. Chosen as the capital, it rose from the prairie with a sense of purpose that differed from the rail towns scattered across the state. Streets were laid out carefully, buildings planned with permanence in mind. At its heart stood the university, its stone structures solid against wind and time. Each autumn, the campus transformed. Trees along walkways burned with color, reds, golds, deep oranges, leaves skittering across paths where students moved in clusters, books tucked under arms. Ideas traveled here as surely as trains carried grain. Young people arrived from farms and towns, bringing accents shaped by open land and long winters. On Saturdays, the city changed completely. Memorial Stadium filled with red, voices rising together in a roar that startled first-time visitors. From above, the crowd looked like a single living thing, pulsing with shared emotion. Football became more than a game. It was a declaration of belonging, a reminder that even in a place known for quiet, passion could shake the ground. Lincoln stood as a meeting point of agriculture and education, tradition and ambition. Where the Missouri River curved and widened, Omaha grew louder, faster, rougher. The river carried goods and people from distant places, and the city absorbed them all. Brick warehouses lined the water. Smoke rose from factories. Streets buzzed with motion, voices layered in languages brought from across oceans. Omaha never pretended to be gentle. It worked hard, demanded more, and rewarded those who endured. The city felt different from the plains, closer, denser, alive with friction. At sunset, lights reflected off the Missouri, shimmering gold and white on dark water. The skyline rose behind them, a blend of old and new, of ambition built atop effort. Omaha was proof that Nebraska could grow upward as well as outward. The stockyards defined Omaha's grit. They stretched across acres, pens packed tight with cattle, the air thick with sound and smell. Hooves struck wood and mud. Workers moved constantly, faces set, hands skilled. This was not romantic labor. It was necessary, relentless, and vital. Railcars waited nearby, doors open, ready to carry meat eastward to feed cities that would never see the animals alive. The stockyards pulsed with urgency. Time mattered. Efficiency mattered. For many families, this work meant survival. Immigrants found opportunity here, even if it came at a cost. Their lives settled into routines shaped by whistles and shifts, by exhaustion and endurance. The prairie fed the stockyards fed the nation. When the workday ended, another Omaha emerged. On North 24th Street, music poured out of clubs and dance halls. Jazz spilled into the night, saxophones bending notes low and smooth, trumpets cutting sharp and bright. Inside, smoke curled upward, glasses clinked, and bodies moved close together. This was a Nebraska few outsiders expected. Creativity thrived here, carried by musicians who transformed hardship into sound. The rhythm pushed back against fatigue, against segregation, against limitation. The music traveled beyond the walls, echoing down streets, drifting into memory. It became part of the city's heartbeat, proof that culture could grow even in the hardest soil. By the 1920s, Nebraska balanced between field and factory, silence and sound. Cities grew, towns adapted, farms modernized. The railroad and river continued their work, carrying goods and people in constant motion. Yet even here, beneath electric lights and industrial noise, the sky still mattered. Storms rolled in from the west, towering and inevitable. The wind still pressed against buildings, reminding everyone that the land remained powerful.
The children are scared.
Nebraska was no longer young, but it was not finished. Change waited just beyond the horizon.